for the most part, what they had to do to lead up to that 20 miler, right? So they probably had to do Saturday easy, Friday easy, maybe even Thursday easy, probably even a day off in there somewhere, right? So there's 3 days right there. Then they do that long run. For the most part, those people are usually pretty spent, right? So they're like, okay, now I'm broken down, right? So I've got to take Monday, Tuesday, maybe I can do something on Wednesday, but how much is that going to be, right? So in essence, you've spent 5 to 6 days focused on one run, right? And so if you scale that back a little bit, and now you can do 2 to 3 workouts in that same 6 to 7 day, 6 day period, how much more is your training going to be benefited, right? Because now.
Could you tell us a little bit about you and your professional work?
Sure. So I've been running for, almost 30. Oh my gosh, almost 30 years. so I've been running for a long time. And I went to Central Michigan University and was on the cross country and track team there. And then I got a master's in exercise science. And I was running for Hanson Brooks Distance Project. I ran for them, for Kevin and Keith, from 2004 through 2018. And so, 3 Olympic trials, lots of world majors, all that good stuff. And then I was actually working for a local hospital, Beaumont Hospital, in their cardiology department. So I was working with cardiac rehab patients, basically getting them exercising after they had some sort of either stent or, bypass, whatever it was. And then, Kevin and Keith kind of did these clinics for the Detroit Marathon. And so they, their kids were getting older and I think they kind of wanted to transition out of that. And that was a kind of a good fill-in to come in behind them. And so I started doing those. And then that kind of evolved into just kind of helping people on the side with coaching and stuff like that. And it was really kind of before the advent of online coaching and stuff like that. So that's where it started. And then I officially formed a business in 2006, and then I've been going from there. And then so that kind of transitioned into I left the hospital and was working mainly with just coaching athletes, and now I have 4 or 5 coaches that work for me, and we just, that's all we do really. So it's come a long way. And then in 2000, I'm going to say 2008 or so, Kevin and Keith were approached with doing a book for the Hanson, their philosophy. And, they own 4 running stores. They're coaching an elite team of athletes. They have their own families. And so Keith was basically like, we really just don't have time to do this. And so he said, with my background and just being around the team for so long, he said, would you want to do it? And so I said, heck yeah, I'll write it. And so, the first edition was basically just, kind of refining Kevin and Keith's thoughts on the philosophy and making sure I was right in presenting what their philosophy was. And then we did a second edition and a half marathon edition, and then a first marathon edition. And so, it's really kind of how the last, 12, 13 years have evolved into just kind of going from kind of a side hustle coaching to a full business to author, right? It was never really expected. It just kind of happened.
It must be exciting to take your passion for running and make it into your career, though.
It really is. And, and honestly, as I get older, like I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, I still train pretty hard, but not, not at the same level when I was, 30 years old. And, I think, my goals with running have changed, but the joy I really truly get now is just seeing other people succeed with their own running. Now you truly do get it's almost like, not that I feel guilty, but it's almost like it's just as big of a benefit for me as it is for them.
Yeah. And you mentioned that in the book, and the book, Hansons Marathon Method, I hadn't heard of it, but I engulfed it this week. I absolutely loved it. So I will put a link in the description for the listeners. But if we learn a little more about it, I think people will be, excited to learn more if they're like me and not familiar with it.
And honestly, that's the one thing I've really enjoyed over the years is that people say they've learned a lot as far as from the science background, but it didn't feel like they were reading a science textbook. And that
Mm.
was really what, and that's kind of my whole thing is I want to, I have a degree in exercise science. I went through physiology and all that good stuff. And, I guess Kevin kind of put it the best way. It's like coaches know what to do, and then scientists come in later and explain how they do it. Right. And so, and I've really truly learned that. Like now I've kind of feel like I've flipped my role is where now I feel like I'm kind of following what the science is to present what coaches are already doing, right? And so that's that. So I like that aspect of it.
Mm. And I know it's difficult to take a whole method and philosophy and several books and try and sum it up for us. So go into as much detail as you like. But could you tell us a little bit about the Hansons Marathon Method?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest misnomer about it is whenever anybody does know of Hansons Marathon Method, they think 16-mile long runs, right? And so that's what they focus on, right? And so, and I'll be honest, like when VeloPress actually came to us it's Pocket Outdoor Meet. I don't even know what it is now. It's not Pocket. It's been sold a couple of times, but I think it's owned by Outside Magazine now. And anyway, they approached us and they first wanted to call it, less is more. And I said, if you actually looked at the schedule, I was not like, yeah, you're only doing a 16-mile long run, but you're putting in some miles. And so I think, and then, oh yeah, you're right. So that's the thing, like, don't get caught on that the 16-mile long run it's part of the program, but it's not the whole program. And so it's really more about just, I think with Kevin and Keith and what their whole thing was when they started kind of coaching people in the early 90s. And like I said, they were doing clinics for the Detroit Marathon and stuff like that. And it was really more about getting those people to learn how to train and thrive in the marathon rather than just train and survive a marathon, right? So that, you do the 20-mile long runs, but you're only doing 30 to 40 miles a week, right? And so they wanted to say, well, let's balance this out a little bit more. So you really look at it and it's more what I would like to think is more of a balanced approach to the training and really getting a person to put all aspects of the training into, weeks and months of accumulation and then not just survive a marathon because you were able to survive 20-mile runs, but you can actually run well, even though your longest run is 16 miles, right? So that's a big component of it. And, there's a big term that we use a lot with our coaching is, cumulative fatigue. And that's really the look at we take as with training is like, how do we get somebody to deal with the fatigue that comes with running a marathon and training for a marathon, but not going overboard and being overtrained, right? So it is a delicate effort at points. And that's where I hope the book, we do well with saying, hey, take it easy on your easy days, your workouts where they're supposed to be. And then you do an appropriate long run. So I guess, it comes down to, moderate to high mileage or volume, but spread out in a manner that you're not running 50% of your volume on a long run day. It's going to be kept to 25-ish% of your week. And then that allows the rest of your week to accumulate more on your easy runs and do bigger volume workouts and things like that. And then, just really being able to stay consistent and things like that. And so I think if those are kind of the 4 pillars, I would say. So appropriate paces, appropriate volume, higher to moderate weekly volume, and then an appropriate long run, and then staying consistent. Really, those would be the main components of the program.
Well, if I give you my impression from just reading the book and looking at the plans, how it differs from sort of typical marathon programs is just like you said, that instead of having one long run at the weekend, gradually ramping up and coming to about 20 miles, 32 kilometers for the Canadians. And you sort of have more running, more miles per week, but less long run miles. So like you said, about 25% of the weekly mileage is the long run. But then if we I was looking at the beginner and advanced programs just before we got on, in the beginner program, even I think it goes as high as like 60 miles a week, which is like around 100 kilometers,
Hmm.
which is quite a bit higher than a lot of
Yeah, absolutely.
typical marathon programs. But then, like you said, the long run isn't as long. So, how do you find people cope with that difference, right? It's not so much harder or easier. It's different. It's more miles spread out.
Hmm.
Where do people have challenges with that method?
I think the biggest challenge is really, it's labeled beginner and advanced marathon plans, right? And in reality, the beginner plan is probably at least an intermediate plan for
Yeah, I
most
looked at it, I was like,
online plans, right?
what
Yeah.
what are they?
Yeah, right. So, and so that was, going, kind of sidetracking is a little bit of why I wanted to write the first marathon method book, was so that we could put maybe a step down plan in there that would be
Okay.
more appropriate for a true beginner marathoner, right? Um, so you're right, absolutely. It's more of an intermediate and then an advanced. But I do think where I think people, their biggest mistake they make is they look at just beginner and advanced, and so they say, "Oh, I've done a couple marathons in the past, so I'm going to do the advanced." In reality, the beginner plan is more than enough schedule to get them where they want to go. Right. So say they want to run a 3:45 marathon and they jump right into the advanced plan. Reality is the beginner plan would be more than enough um, to get them to that 3:45, right? So, and I've tried to cover that on my site and in some blog posts and things like that. And that's kind of one of the things, like, that even now the second edition is, 8 or 9 years old. It's like, that's something that I could probably put into another edition of that, like where you really stand at choosing the right schedule.
Do you have any sort of prerequisite for someone thinking about using, let's say, the beginner marathon, the Hansons method? Is it like certain amount of years running, certain amount of time without an injury, or a certain amount of kilometers per week for a certain amount of months? Like, do you have any kind of entry level? Don't do it if you can't do this yet.
Yeah, it's, I personally, the biggest one is just making sure you're healthy before you start
Hmm.
the plan, right? Like, if you're starting a plan and you're only at 80%, it's probably not going to go well, right? So you want to be healthy. The beginner plan starts low enough where you just need to really be healthy and ready to get into the rhythm of running. Obviously, some running history would be good, but for the most part, so I'm looking at the beginner plan right now, and it starts at 12 miles for the week, right? So that's not too bad. Most, what you're looking at 20K for a week, right? So roughly, so pretty much anybody could jump into that, but I would say just being healthy to start is the biggest thing.
Well, I think the exciting bit for me, because I'm a physio, really, and every runner I work with is injured or recovering from injured or repeatedly injured. You
Hmm.
know, so that's kind of my sample, my bias. I don't see as much just healthy people who are not having
Right.
troubles, which are, a rarity. I think statistically, injuries are
Hmm.
so prevalent in
Yeah.
particularly marathon running. The the exciting bit for me was that most running injuries have a type of run that they hit, and often it's the long run. ITB, patellofemoral pain. They often people will do 50 kilometers across a week, and they're like, oh, all the week runs were fine until I
Hmm.
tried to do that 20K at the weekend or that 25, and around 15K it starts hurting. And then for me, it's exciting because I can take this method and adapt it and apply it to those runners, spread their mileage out, and still have a bit of confidence that we can get them fit enough for their
Hmm.
marathon, without going over that threshold in the long run that provokes their injury. It was really exciting.
Yeah. And honestly, I think, so we get a lot of times people want to race throughout the segment. So training for a fall marathon is a good example, because you start in, mid to late June for the most part, and then you go through October. So they'll want to run some 5Ks along the way, and then maybe a half marathon earlier in the fall. And I say, don't expect PRs because you're not training for those races, right? They get so strong just from being consistently training 5 to 6 days a week and accumulating that volume for weeks and months at a time, that they've built their aerobic system up so much that they're just naturally faster now, right? And so, and that's always a big, kind of a boost to their morale too, because it comes at the time where like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. How am I going to run a marathon? And then they do this, and like, I was so tired, and then I still PR'd in the half marathon, right? So like, yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, I think just spreading that out and instead of just putting all your emphasis on one thing makes a big difference. And going to your point, I think like that's exactly it. Because if they're running, say, 5 to 8K on an easy run during the week, and that's as far as they go, and all of a sudden they do a 25 to 30K long run, that's such a spread from where they're usually at to where they have to go now, right? And so that's a big uncharted territory that they have to go in. And I think a lot of times they just, how it is, you just reach a threshold and your body breaks down at that point, right? And so you've done nothing really to kind of ease into that threshold and gently nudge that threshold up along the way, right? So I think that's where you do get into a lot of trouble.
And my impression was that, and just from looking at the plans and the workouts and stuff, is that your method seems to be like, try and work out your goal pace, and then we're going to prescribe workouts based on pace or feel, like effort. Mm-hmm. Is that the way you guys approach it?
Yeah, definitely. Kevin and Keith are really big on pace, right? So they will definitely be very conscious of that pace. So even if that, I'm looking at the beginner plan. So even in week 6, if that 5-mile tempo is a little fast, they're okay with it because they want you to feel out what that feels like, so that by the end of the time, you're doing a 10-mile tempo run or a 16K tempo run, and how that pace feels, especially when you're tired, right? And so that's a big benefit, right? So if you go into a race and I'm going to feel this kind of way late into a race, I'll still be okay. I've had to push through that before, and a lot of times if you put all that emphasis on the long run and you don't have the ability to go back to how actual pace feels late into a race, that's when people kind of whoa, throw up their hands, I don't know where to go from here, right? Because what they're naturally going to do is just slow down, right? Because it's logical, right? Like if I'm crossing that line and I still have 10K to go or 15K to go, I don't want to go into the danger zone so much that I'm going to have to walk this thing in, right? Like I want to be able to try and finish this pretty strong. So I think that's where it comes into play,
I might throw in a listener question there from Dave because it's relevant. So Dave asked, I'd like to know what they feel the maximum duration of the long run should be. A 16-mile run might take 2 hours for one runner and 3 for another, depending on the fitness and therefore pace.
Yeah. So yeah, we actually cover that in the book because it's not only just a percentage, but ideally an amount of time too. And I think I personally put in there about 3 hours or so for the long, and breaking it down, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but basically came down to like, if you were doing a 10 to 10:30 minute mile for here, then that would basically put you in that 3-hour range for a 16-miler. And obviously if you're a little bit slower than that, you're going to go a little bit over that, but you're talking about one plan to fit a bell curve of people, right? So for the most part, it fits pretty well for most of those people. And on the faster side of that, it still puts you in, pretty close to a 2-hour run for the majority of people who are, I'd say most people using this plan are, the faster side is probably like low 3s, and then all the way up to 4 hours plus for the marathon.
So do you feel like, because I've heard people mention in passing, I think it came up in your book, but I'm not sure the detail of it, but referencing that there's diminishing returns beyond a certain point. I think the time they mentioned was about that 3-hour mark.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
Yeah. So just from my personal experience, what I found is, and actually, I can't remember who was talking about this too. I think Robert Chapman. He used to be at the University of Indiana, but I don't know where he's at now. He coached elites back in the day too. Uh, but basically, if a person goes over a certain amount of time, so let's say say they just do a 20-mile long run, and they they it takes them, let's say it takes them 3.5 hours. For the most part, what they had to do to lead up to that 20 miler, right? So they probably had to do Saturday easy, Friday easy, maybe even Thursday easy, probably even a day off in there somewhere, right?
Hmm.
So there's 3 days right there. Then they do that long run. For the most part, those people are usually pretty spent, right? So they're like, okay, now I'm broken down, right? So I've got to take Monday, Tuesday, maybe I can do something on Wednesday, but how much is that going to be, right? So in essence, you've spent 5 to 6 days focused on one run,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
so if you scale that back a little bit, and now you can do 2 to 3 workouts in that same 6 day period, how much more is your training going to be benefited, right? Because now you're strong enough to get through that long run, and you're resilient enough to bounce back and recover well enough to come back and do something on Tuesday or something like that. But you've also done something on the Thursday before that. So Thursday you did a workout, Friday was easy, Saturday was easy, Sunday long run, Monday easy, Tuesday workout, right? So in that same time frame, you've done three times as much, right? So,
So
but
I
you've
see. It's
ideally
not so
recovered.
much that the longer running, like running beyond 3 hours, wouldn't benefit your fitness. It's that when you do that, the effect that it has on the rest of your week or the
Mm-hmm.
days surrounding that
Surrounding it, yeah,
doesn't outweigh the benefits
right,
of doing it.
right, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So the way I view it is, if you, yeah, you've done that 20-mile long run, but what you've taught yourself to do, just run slow for 20 miles, right?
Hmm.
It hasn't really, you've built that overall endurance up, but I would argue that you're going to get that same endurance effect from running a 16 miler at a little bit faster pace too, right? And then
Okay.
still being able to recover from that and go on to the next thing without missing a beat.
And I mean, particularly for those doing their first marathon, but for all, do you have either from your athletes or are people nervous about psychologically or physiologically handling a race that might take them three and a
Oh,
half, four and a
that's the
half,
biggest
like longer?
That's the biggest thing, man. That's the
Right.
biggest thing. Everybody's like, oh no, and so what people I coach too, they'll be like, oh, I got lost on my run and it just happened to take me to 20 miles. I'm like, okay, sure, right. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest fear. But so I would say to that though, all right, so Kevin always kind of had a statement where he said that 16 miler. So like, I'm just looking at the plan real quick. 16 milers would be on week 11, week 13 and week 15 of an 18-week program. So by the time you get to those last two, especially, you're in a position where you're doing the biggest volume, the biggest workouts, the hardest workouts, all that stuff, right? So his argument is that you are doing the last 16 of the race and not the first 16 of the race,
Okay.
right? Because
Yep.
you're going into it on tired legs, right? So that's kind of the idea of cumulative fatigue as well. So all you've done during the week is accumulated, still in your legs going into the Sunday long run, and then I'd even argue on top of that. So for the 16-mile long run, you do 8. Sometimes I give people 10 miles before the 16-mile long run. Maybe it's in the advanced plan, but so say it's 8. You've done 24 miles in roughly a 24-hour period too, right? So if you run at 8 o'clock on Saturday, you've done 8 miles. You run 8 o'clock on Sunday for your long run. So starting that whole 24-hour cycle, you're putting in a lot of mileage on your legs too, right? So it's not just what you've done during the week, but you're also doing you're doing one of a bigger easy run on Saturday and then coming into your long run on Sunday too. So you are putting a lot of volume in that short time frame. So it's really like a bigger easy run, hopefully recover during the day, come back and do the long run on Sunday. So you have, increase, decrease, and then increase back up again. So hopefully,
And am I right in thinking it's about 6 runs a week every week, or does that change?
Pretty much. So the beginner plan it eases you into that. It starts at like 4 and then goes to 5 and then 6. But yeah, the advanced plan, you're pretty much 6 days a week from the go.
And do people have trouble with that? Like practically, you know, just balancing work, family, and
Right.
trying to run
Right.
more days a week. How do and you could say, oh, you'll do this, you'll do that, but how do your athletes find it? Does it work for them? What do they find difficult? What do they find? How do they do it?
Well, they'll complain about it definitely. Like I will be the brunt of their frustration for a couple months, but once they do it, I always say like so. I use the hockey analogy here. Like so, uh, there's a story where Scotty Bowman was the coach for the Red Wings for a long time, and they won a lot of Stanley Cups. And it sounds like the rumors are that the players hated him 364 days a year. But the day they got the Stanley Cup, he was the greatest coach in the world, right? So I kind of like using that analogy. Like you hate me for the whole year, but when you're successful on race day, but no, it's seriously, it is a big complaint, and it's definitely a legitimate complaint. But I'll tell you what. So like I think just looking at our demographics of our clientele to say, basically 36 to 44 is the biggest population group we use, and I'd say 60% of that is women, 40% of men. So a lot of the women are either professionals or by I mean professional in some industry, or stay-at-home moms, and they actually crush it, right? Like they're probably the most goal-oriented people. They make it work. They figure it out. They do it. And then the high-level guys I coach, like some of the busiest people I coach in life are the ones that run the most mileage too, right? And I'm talking about, doctors, CEOs, things like that. They just do really well with managing their time. Now, the flip side of that, some of their diet and stuff like that is probably not the best. They probably don't get the best sleep, but they put in the work pretty regularly. So it does, but I think it forces some looking at what is important in their daily schedule, and I would say if it's for 18 weeks, maybe it's worth it, right? Like maybe it's worth not scrolling through social media for an extra half an hour a day, right? Or whatever, and I'm guilty of it too, right? So I can't, it's like I do the same thing, and I have to decide, like, am I going to go get a run in, or am I going to just sit here, right? And so I think it kind of forces your hand a little bit too, to just kind of where can I manage things a little bit better? What do I really need in my life? So it's not necessarily a running thing, but more of a management type of thing. But I do find like after a while, people really enjoy it, right? And so some people just go down to 5 days a week, which I'm fine with 5 days a week as well. But for the most part, yeah, I think people, once they get into it, it becomes more of a lifestyle type of thing for them.
And a lot of your athletes follow that 6 day a week year round, or do you have sort of periods leading up to the marathon where you get more similar to the plan and then you back off at other times? How do you do that?
Yeah, we'll definitely back off. So I think if it's 6 days a week, 7 days a week during the marathon season, yeah, we take a break. We'll go down. We might not even train really for anything for 6-8 weeks, and then start training again. So a lot of times what I'll do, like right now, spring marathon season. So say April to mid-May is the biggest marathon for the spring, and so that's obviously busy time of year. But then they'll take maybe a week or two off, and then the start of summer vacations for families. So might take another 2 weeks where it's like pretty laid back. And then we might just work on speed, maybe like mid-June through July. And so if they were running 60 miles a week, they might run 40 miles a week, but it's more intense stuff too. And then decide what we're going to do for the fall and go from there too. So yeah, we definitely, I'm a big proponent of not just doing marathon after marathon after marathon. Let's do a marathon segment. Let's reevaluate what are our weaknesses, and then go from there. So, there's a general rule that, again, is a Kevin and Keith rule that I follow, is, really kind of stick to 3 marathons in 2 years is really kind of the max I look at athletes doing. And so go back, and it kind of brings back the fun and stuff too. Like if they haven't trained for a 5K or 10K in years, let's go do that. Let's go see where you're at, and just shaking things up as far as workouts we're doing can do wonders for just motivation and things like that too. So yeah, we
Yeah.
definitely switch it around.
Something I noticed about the plan that I wasn't um, sure what to make of was the last few weeks, both plans, the mileage stays reasonably high. There wasn't a big
Mhm.
drop off in a kind of taper. What's the thinking there?
So with Kevin and Keith, and they've always talked about it as like, um, say you're used to getting 6 hours of sleep, and then all of a sudden you're getting 12 hours of sleep. That first few days that you're getting that 12 hours of sleep, do you feel fresh or do you feel groggy? Usually, a lot of times you feel groggy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of their take on it. I actually do like it because so what I'll find a lot of times with people, they cut too much, and so they'll go from say they go from 60 miles a week, they'll go to like 20 to 30 miles a week for 2 or 3 weeks,
Mm.
and so to me, that kind of just gets the body out of rhythm, right?
Mm.
And so I kind of like to keep it consistent. Um, what just want to take a look at these last, yeah. So even that last week, yeah, you have this, like I have 6 by mile, 10 mile tempo. You do scale back a little bit, but um, really try to build up until that last 10 days. And then that last 10 days, there's really no intensity. It's just volume. So to me, it's one or the other. You don't want, if you're going to cut a lot of volume, then you really need to make sure the intensity is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kevin and Keith chose the other route, and they say we're going to keep the volume there and reduce the intensity. So it's kind of the reverse of adding on when you're starting, right? So we talk about fit when you're adding on frequency, intensity, time, and type, right? So if you increase frequency too much, or intensity too much, or time too much, what's the person going to do? They're going to get hurt. So it's kind of the reverse of that on the taper. If we don't want to adjust so many of the variables that we've taken away from actually what we've done for the last 16 and a half weeks, 17 weeks.
Yeah. And you mentioned this cumulative fatigue, and it comes up in the book that I get the impression that you sort of feel during the course of the training, um, quite like knackered, like during the week, like tired.
Yeah.
Is it all the time? Is it just after workouts? Do you recover quickly? Like, how do people experience that?
I would actually say it's before a run, right? So if they're a morning runner, they get up, they're like, God, I do not want to do this.
Okay.
And they get out there for a mile or two, and they're like, oh, okay, this isn't so bad. And they get another mile, like, oh, I feel all right. And then they get done, like, okay, I'm really glad I did that, right? And so that's, and I would say the biggest difference between cumulative fatigue and overtraining is you start out feeling like crap, but you hit the workout fine, right? You hit the paces, you're fine, you move on with your day. Where it's too much is if it starts out like crap and it continues to, it doesn't get any better, right? And so that's your signal that, okay, I'm probably overcooking a little bit.
Yeah. And do you have sort of down weeks, weeks where the training gets a little easier, or do you find that you can just kind of keep people around this kind of frequency and mileage?
So not necessarily a down week, but what I will, if you look at the plan, so like I'm looking at, so week 13, you have the 16-mile long run. So and really have 3 workouts that week. But the next week, you have the 2 workouts during the week, but then you have you have an 8 and a 10 on Saturday and Sunday. So you don't have a true long run that following week. So really every other week is kind of a down. The mileage is still pretty high, but you only have 2 workouts instead of 3, basically.
Okay.
So that definitely helps. And what I'll further do with people is I will say, okay, instead of going Tuesday and Thursday that week, why don't you go Tuesday and Friday that week? Give yourself 2 full days between workouts. Then you have 2 full days on the weekend, and then you have Monday. So you have 2 days between workouts during the week, and then you have 3 days before your next workout the following week, right? And so that will do wonders for kind of active recovery, right? You're still putting in the volume, but you're just giving yourself a couple extra days recovery between workouts, and that's the biggest thing, right? Because what I find is, so my biggest thing with what I find with people is that Tuesday, Thursday tends to get people the biggest problems, right? So that's your workout Tuesday, and then the Wednesday is an off day, and then Thursday you come back and run, right? And so sometimes I'll just give people Tuesday and Friday, or you go Monday, Thursday, Saturday, or something like that. So you like, if somebody's reading the book and they followed it and they want to follow the plan, but they want to shift things around, that's not a problem at all. Like it's not like you have to do things Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, or else it doesn't work, right? It's just that's kind of so just to kind of put this in perspective, Tuesdays were speed days for Hansons running shops, so that's where people met for speed. Thursdays was at the Royal Oak store, and that's where they did their tempo runs. And then Sunday was at one of the other stores, and they did their long run. So, and then Wednesdays was actually clinic days. So that's why the schedule's set up the way it is. So you can move that around. There's not a problem with moving that around to give yourself an extra day of recovery. You're still going to get the benefits of that.
Yeah, and I think that's what I liked so much about it was that, when I've read different books and looked at different programs over the year, there's sort of variations on a theme, especially for the marathon. And yours was just an alternative. It was a different route to Rome kind of thing. So if I'm having trouble with people, like I mentioned, with long runs or with specific injuries, it doesn't mean that necessarily we have to pull out. We can try a different method, and you can change the days, you can change the workouts, and go for more weekly volume and less weekend volume.
Right.
It adds a different way to get to the fitness you need, and then sort of gives you the confidence that it'll still work. And potentially, do you find it works better than people who are doing more the traditional lower volume during the week and higher in the weekend?
Yeah, I do, and we have a Facebook group that's about a little over 11,000 people, and sometimes I'll just kind of ask those questions, and it seems like or people just even posted it, like they did whatever program, and it got them through, but exactly like I was talking about earlier on, where they felt like they just got through, and this I really wanted to show people, like, this is how you train, right? Like, if this is how like, I want you to do this for a long time. I don't want this just to be a situation where, okay, I'm going to do this to cross something off my bucket list. And I will say that's the biggest testimony I have is that how many people came to me and said, I just want to cross something off my bucket list, and then I never want to run a marathon again. And that was 15 marathons ago, right? And that's the biggest compliment, right? Is that this was a way for them to train hard, learn how to train, and then apply it. Maybe it might look a little different, but then they can apply it to the rest of their training. And so, because a lot of times they got through and they're like, oh my gosh, I felt like I could do this again, right? Like they, maybe not like 5 minutes after they got done, but like the next week or so, they're like, wow, that wasn't, I'm recovering. I was stronger through the race, and now I want to run. So I ran 4:15. Now I want to break 4 hours. Then I want to qualify for Boston. So you keep seeing that progression over and over and over again. That's what I truly enjoy seeing.
Yeah, it's almost like instead of having this intense period of suffering in the long run and on race day, you're sort of smothering that out a little bit. Across that 18 weeks or whatever it is.
It's 1,000 deaths over 18 weeks, but then.
And there was a bit at the start of the book, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I really loved it. It was like, often you'll see it marketed that you can train less and do better. You can run, just a few workouts a week or a certain amount of hours, and you can do your marathon. And you were like, no, this is really hard. You have to train really hard. You have to change your life, like, circumstances. You have to make time. It's a big endeavor, and it is. Marathons are very hard. There's a very long way to run. It takes months to get in condition and a lot of hard work. And I really like that reframing as like, this is a thing I'm going to take on and I'm going to do it properly, instead of sort of trying to have your cake and eat it and get it without kind of earning it,
Yeah, 100% on that. Yeah, I think, and that really bothers me too. Like, I see that with magazine titles of the ultimate guide, and like, how do you know, right? Like, everybody, like, it may or may not work, right? But anyway, yeah. So I wholeheartedly believe in that. And I probably lose people on whether or not they want to try the program, but I feel like if you're upfront with them and you're transparent with them, then they're more likely to be all in at that point, right? Because they're gonna trust you a little bit more. Like, hey, I'm not he's not sugarcoating it. He's not lying to me, right? Like, and I would rather have that than just saying, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want. And like, you may or may not, I don't know. Right.
Mm.
So it's always
Yeah,
big
well,
for me.
people don't, whether it's their 20th or their first marathon, they don't register because they want to do something easy. We do
Mm-hmm.
it because it's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we want that challenge. So laying it out there as a hard challenge right from the start is refreshing. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. And I think, not, this isn't just for running per se, but it's like, like with my daughter's old. When I was running really competitive, she was too young to really understand what was going on. But now I'm at a point where, I'll be 41 in April, and she's like, Dad, you could qualify for Paris. I'm like, you understand how hard that would be to qualify? She's like, you could make the trials. I'm like, okay. So, but it's like, for me, it's like, she sees that and like, okay, well, maybe that's something I do want to try for. I'll be 43, 44 years old, but why not? Let's see what happens, But that's where I'm at. It's like, okay, now I've got to kind of refocus. Like, how am I going to break up my day so I can train what I need to do in order to run what I'd have to run? And but that's like, you know, people are, you do it for yourself, but also like, your kids are watching you and your
Yeah.
spouses are watching you, and like, yeah, you want to do this hard thing, but you don't want to do the work for it. Like that's, I don't know. Like, and so you do get with some of the people I coach too, and it's like, you want this, but you understand what kind of work is going to have to go in to accomplish that, right? And so I think
Yeah.
that's a big wake up call.
It's funny as you were talking. I don't know where the quote comes from. I heard it on the show Scrubs, but I always remember it and I love it. It's nothing in life worth having comes easy. And I think that's
Mhm.
just a
Yeah.
wonderful quote for all aspects of life, including marathon training.
Well, and I think too, just the sense of accomplishment you get from that, and saying, hey, okay, I can do this. I can go on this journey, and I can put in this hard work and see the reward for it. And you know, and so to me, that's what it is. Like, you're putting in this work, and you're probably making habit changes and lifestyle changes and all these things. And then you get to the race, and that's really should be the reward, right? That should be the reward for all the hard work you've done. And it's not something you should go in and fear. It's something you should go in and attempt to enjoy.
Hmm. Well, I think that's a lovely place to end. Could you, is there any way you would like to direct listeners to learn a bit more about you?
Sure. My website's probably the best place to go. I'm not the best on social media. It's just lukehumphrey.running.com. And then you can see all our blog posts. I do have a podcast. I'm not as regular as you, but I try to put it out once in a while. But yeah, we actually have a free community you can join on there too. It's kind of like a Facebook on our site. And so I'm better on there. And yeah, that's probably the best place to go.
Okay, cool. I'll put links to those in the description. I've been listening to your podcast this week. It's been really insightful. It was great, and the book, can't recommend it highly enough. So
Awesome. I
excellent
appreciate
work
that.
there.
Awesome.
All right, man. I'm gonna hit stop on the recording there.
Okay.